What is the line between human power and divine judgment? What happens when an arrogant man, blinded by his own authority, decides to mock the sacred? Imagine the most extravagant party in history. Gold, wine, music, and thousands of guests. The king is drunk on power and alcohol, feeling invincible. And then, at the absolute peak of his arrogance, the music stops, the laughter dies, because a hand appears from nowhere. A disembodied, ghostly hand, writing a cryptic message of judgment on the plaster wall in front of the king. This is the story of Belshazzar's Feast, a terrifying true story from Daniel chapter 5 that unfolds in a single fatal night. It's a reminder that no amount of gold, power, or security can shield you from a final, instantaneous reckoning. Stick with this story, because the judgment written on that wall applies to every generation. The place is Babylon, the center of the greatest empire on earth. The king is Belshazzar, co-ruler with his father Nabonidus. He is arrogant, spoiled, and foolishly complacent. Outside the city walls, the Medo-Persian armies are closing in, but Belshazzar doesn't care. Babylon's walls are impenetrable, reaching hundreds of feet high. He decides to throw a party to show his utter contempt for danger. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000, Daniel 5:1. In his drunken, defiant state, Belshazzar commits an unforgivable act of sacrilege. He commands his servants to bring out the golden and silver vessels that his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar had stolen from the temple of God in Jerusalem decades earlier. These vessels, designed for the sacred worship of the Lord, were now filled with wine. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. This was a direct, arrogant mocking of the one true, unseen God, a declaration that Babylon's golden idols were superior to the Holy One of Israel. At the very instant the king finishes his toast to the false gods, while the music is loudest and the laughter is highest, the impossible happens. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaister of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Imagine the shock, not a tremor, not a flash of lightning, just the silent, deliberate fingers of a man's hand appearing mid-air, bathed in the light of the palace lamps, writing on the white plaster wall. The effect on the king was immediate and total. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. Daniel 5:6. His face went pale, his knees began to knock uncontrollably. The king, who moments ago had been drinking wine from holy vessels, was now a terrified child, paralyzed by the sight of judgment. The party was over. The silence in the massive hall was deafening. Belshazzar screamed for his wise men, the astrologers and the soothsayers, the supposed experts in ancient knowledge. He offered them the ultimate reward, a chain of gold, the scarlet robes of honor, and the rank of third ruler in the kingdom. The sages were ushered in full of confidence. They looked at the script. It was written clearly, but they could not read or interpret the words. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. The words were not magic, they were Aramaic, but they were written with such authority and fear that the sages' minds, men who were meant to commune with the gods, were incapable of discerning their meaning. They failed. The king's panic grew worse. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. The entire empire's leadership was paralyzed by a four-word message. At this point, the queen mother, likely Nebuchadnezzar's widow, who remembered the past, entered the chaotic banquet hall. She alone remembered the prophet Daniel, who had served her husband years ago, interpreting dreams and signs. Daniel, now an old man, was summoned. He stood before the terrified king, looking at the man who had dared to mock his God. Belshazzar, desperate, tried to bribe him again. If you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, You shall be clothed with purple, and have a chain of gold about your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Daniel's response is one of the most powerful and uncompromising in Scripture. He refuses the reward, but accepts the commission to speak the truth. "Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation." Daniel then launches into a fierce denunciation, reminding Belshazzar of his grandfather's fall and judgment, and condemning the king for drinking from the holy vessels, and hast not glorified the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways. Daniel turned to the cryptic words on the wall: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. He read the words aloud, and then delivered the terrifying instant verdict: "Many numbered, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Your time is up, the lease on your power has expired. Tekel weighed, thou art weighed in the balances, and art found wanting. You were measured against the standard of justice and righteousness, and you failed. You are empty. Upharsin, divided. Thy kingdom is divided, and given to the Medes and Persians. The end is here, and your empire is already lost to your enemies." In that room, Daniel spoke the death sentence of the Babylonian Empire. Belshazzar, true to his word even in fear, placed the golden chain around Daniel's neck. But the honor meant nothing. In that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom. Daniel 5:33-1. The Medo-Persians, who had been surrounding the city, found an unguarded river entry, entered the city, and killed the arrogant King Belshazzar that very night. The empire fell before the feast was even cleared. The story of the writing on the wall is the ultimate reminder of the brevity of human power. Belshazzar lost his kingdom, his life, and his legacy in the span of just a few hours because he failed to honor the one true source of all power. This story forces us to look at the scales of justice and ask, if your life, your work, or your ambition were weighed right now, would you be found wanting? The words Mene, Tekel are a timeless warning against arrogance and sacrilege.